As Americans, we cannot allow this to continue.
What happens when an ordinary American night hides the opening move of the largest fentanyl raid in U.S. history? What does it mean when a Midwest suburb quiet and sunlit by porch lamps becomes the front line of a transnational chemical war? And how close did the country come to seeing 70 million lethal doses disperse across its cities before federal agents moved in? These questions hang in the air over Ohio as at 10:29 p.m. the lights begin to shift and America's calm dissolves into coordinated urgency. SUV convoys roll out from FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security Investigations field offices. Tactical teams brace inside armored vehicles. Radios crackle with coded confirmations across Cincinnati, Dayton, Atlanta, New York, and smaller towns that rarely make national headlines. A 2-year manhunt reaches the moment federal planners have prepared for Operation Box Cutter is go execute. The event is not merely a multi-city raid, it is the culmination of an intelligence war fought across border supply chains and digital networks. It begins with a directive issued shortly after Donald Trump returned to the presidency in order to dismantle the fentanyl pipelines that have torn through American communities. Nearly 100,000 Americans died from fentanyl overdoses last year, according to updated reporting from U.S. health agencies and international outlets. Federal officials framed the crisis as a threat not only to public health, but to national security and American strategic authority. Inside the Cincinnati FBI field office, the final brief unfolds like a scene from a geopolitical thriller. Live feeds display warehouse rooftops in Kentucky suburban homes in Ohio, an industrial park outside Atlanta, and a Queens apartment block blinking under streetlights. Each red-ring target is scheduled for simultaneous breach. At the center stands FBI Director Kash Patel, not behind a podium, but on the ground with his teams. His reminder is stark: 139 kilograms of fentanyl powder recovered so far enough to kill tens of millions. Tonight is not about arresting street dealers, it is about cutting the line. Key developments leading to this moment stretch back to 2022, when a seemingly routine customs inspection at Chicago O'Hare flagged a suspicious shipment mislabeled as pharmaceutical binders. The shipping density looked wrong. The field test flashed positive for fentanyl precursors. That anomaly became a thread investigators pulled for 18 months, unraveling a web linking Chinese chemical companies, U.S. intermediaries, crypto-financed laundering networks, and cartel-connected pill press labs. Major international news organizations have since confirmed that Chinese suppliers played a growing role in global precursor distribution, shifting the battlefield from borders to chemistry labs and digital wallets. Strategically, the operation represents an evolution in how the United States projects power. Instead of chasing street-level supply, federal agencies now move upstream, targeting chemical synthesis, digital infrastructure, and financial corridors before fentanyl reaches users. Analysts warn that the struggle pits the need for security against civil liberties as surveillance tools expand. Crypto monitoring intensifies, and federal strike authority grows. Under Trump's administration, this balancing act sharpens national survival versus personal freedom, border control versus economic diplomacy with China, domestic safety versus global power positioning. But beyond geopolitics lies the human ledger. Families devastated by overdoses, parents bearing teenagers, communities hollowed out. To these households, the 70 million lethal doses prevented from entering circulation are not statistics. They are lives that will not end on bathroom floors or in the back of ambulances. As federal vehicles push through the night and agents prepare to breach dozens of doors at once, one question lingers over the unfolding operation. If America can sever one fentanyl pipeline tonight, how many more remain hidden in the global shadows, and who will move to stop them next? What if the deadliest drug crisis in modern U.S. history did not begin in cartel strongholds or border tunnels, but inside brightly lit chemical plants thousands of miles away, factories that look on the surface indistinguishable from legitimate pharmaceutical suppliers? And what happens when those factories, protected by legal business licenses and trade corridors, manufacture the molecular ingredients for a poison that has killed more Americans than any war of the 21st century? Under the glow of neon signs in Shanghai, Wuhan, and Shenzhen, reactor tanks hum through the night. Industrial mixers churn chemicals labeled research reagents, biomedical catalysts, and pharmaceutical intermediates. To the untrained eye, this is a picture of modern science. But US investigators discovered something far darker beneath the stainless steel polish, a pipeline of fentanyl precursors engineered to move across continents under a veneer of legitimacy. The event that triggered the unmasking of this network began not in Asia, but at Chicago O'Hare's International Mail Facility, where a routine CBP inspection flagged a drum labeled pharmaceutical binders. The packaging appeared flawless documentation, intact weights, accurate routing, typical. Yet an officer noticed an anomaly. The density readings looked too clean, too uniform. A swab test revealed the truth. Inside the drum sat the chemical building blocks for fentanyl. From that moment, the key developments accelerated. Analysts traced repeated shipments from the same exporter, the same Hong Kong freight intermediaries, the same routing patterns to quiet Ohio towns and industrial strips across Georgia. The companies behind these shipments operated under fully registered Chinese business entities. Their websites advertised lab supplies and reagents used by universities and biotech firms. But according to US indictments and corroborating international coverage, these companies simultaneously shipped tons of pseudo-regulated chemicals compounds essential for fentanyl synthesis, routed through shell distributors and mislabeled to evade scrutiny. One firm already sanctioned under Magnitsky authorities for other abuses exported more than 18 tons of these chemicals between 2023 and 2025. Certificates claimed harmless binders and solvents. Laboratory analysis confirmed industrial tranquilizers and catalytic cutting agents specifically engineered for opioid conversion. Their model was efficient and ruthlessly scalable export-only chemicals, not finished drugs. Let US partners assemble the product on American soil, far from international shipping scrutiny. Strategically, this discovery changed how federal agencies viewed the threat. The fentanyl trade was no longer simply a cartel problem. It was an industrial ecosystem spanning legal supply chains, e-commerce storefronts, crypto finance payment networks, and logistics lanes buried inside the global manufacturing economy. Major news organizations reported that many Chinese exporters positioned themselves in a legal gray zone, taking advantage of regulatory loopholes and minimal precursor oversight. US officials began framing the crisis as a matter of national power. If America could not intercept the chemical origins of fentanyl, its domestic authority and global credibility would erode. Under Donald Trump's presidency, this posture hardened. Washington signaled that precursor trafficking was now treated as an attack on US sovereignty. Diplomatic messages intensified, asset freezes expanded, sanctions packages moved faster, and for the first time in over a decade, an FBI director traveled to Beijing to press the issue face to face. The balance between security and economic diplomacy narrowed. How far should America push a major trading partner while the chemical flow continued to kill tens of thousands at home? The human impact of this hidden pipeline rippled through hospitals, police departments, and families across the United States. The chemicals disguised as lab reagents eventually became counterfeit pills, oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, sold to Americans who never knew they were swallowing fentanyl. Each mislabeled barrel arriving at a U.S. port represented future funerals, emergency room collapses, and neighborhoods grieving children who thought they were taking a study aid or pain relief. As agents reviewed the supply web spanning Chinese corporates, American logistics nodes, crypto laundries, and cartel distributors, one question rose above the data. If legitimate-looking factories can manufacture the seeds of mass death, how can any nation defend itself without reimagining the rules of global trade and chemical regulation? What does it reveal about a nation's vulnerability when the most dangerous synthetic opioid network in US history is anchored not in cartel fortresses or criminal enclaves, but in quiet American neighborhoods, driveways lined with minivans, cul-de-sacs where children ride bicycles, and rented homes that look indistinguishable from any middle-class community? And how does an industrial-scale trafficking chain thrive when its key operators appear so ordinary that neighbors barely remember their names? In the American Midwest, investigators discovered the answer. The fentanyl crisis did not only arrive from the outside, it rooted itself inside communities that never imagined they were housing the operational backbone of a 70 million dose network. At the center of this domestic web stood individuals who on paper lived unremarkable lives but secretly functioned as indispensable connectors between Chinese exporters, cartel chemists, and the Midwestern distribution machine. The event that pulled these figures into the spotlight began when federal analysts matched foreign shipments to two Ohio residents, Eric Payne, 39, and Orion Ori Rafford, 24. Their lives, at least to outsiders, reflected nothing of organized crime. Payne held logistics ties through import-export outfits and trucking companies. Rafford lived in a residential street shared with dog walkers and grocery unloading families. Yet indictments now reveal they played central roles in the domestic arm of a global cartel economy. Payne, according to encrypted communications seized by investigators, coordinated incoming drums of precursor chemicals. He matched shipments to cartel-trained chemists, pill press operators, and regional distributors. One mislabeled drum arriving from Shanghai could pass through him and emerge weeks later as millions of counterfeit pills flooding Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, and beyond. Rafford's role was equally crucial. Her home served as a mid-level staging point. Mislabeled barrels arrived at her garage. Solvents and cutting agents were stored in basements. Crypto payments were routed through her digital wallets to Chinese suppliers. She acted as a financial intermediary, converting cartel cash into cryptocurrency, moving it across privacy chains, and settling it into overseas accounts controlled by shell companies in Asia. Federal documents confirm she was a key translator between the physical world of American distributors and the digital architecture of Chinese exporters. Key developments unfolded as investigators widened their surveillance. The pattern repeated itself across Tennessee, Georgia, and New York ordinary addresses, masking highly sophisticated labs. In Atlanta, an apartment leased by a self-described student researcher contained server racks humming with nodes linked to Chinese chemical firms. In Queens, warehouse units stored barrels labeled industrial reagents, but carrying precursor agents classified as lethal in minute quantities. What emerged, according to U.S. prosecutors and supported by international reporting, was a distributed manufacturing chain, chemicals arriving piecemeal assembled, regionally pressed into counterfeit pharmaceuticals and fed into a distribution network connected to both Sinaloa and CJNG affiliates. Strategically, these American nodes posed a challenge far greater than traditional drug operations. Unlike cartel couriers easily tracked between borders, these individuals blended seamlessly into civilian life. They used UPS, FedEx, and standard LTL freight carriers. They purchased chemicals with legitimate invoices. They routed money through small crypto wallets rather than high-risk exchanges. This camouflage forced federal agencies to rethink their operational doctrine. Under President Trump, the administration shifted toward full-spectrum operations, treating every logistics manager, crypto broker, or lab technician as a potential national security target if tied to foreign precursor flows. The question became not only how to intercept drugs, but how to redefine criminal liability in an era where digital skills could be as dangerous as weapons. Yet beneath the strategic calculus lay the human consequences. Communities in Ohio, Kentucky, and Georgia found themselves unwittingly living next to chemical storage sites potent enough to kill entire neighborhoods with a single spill. Parents who trusted that their streets were safe learned that industrial opioid mixers stood just a few houses away. Many overdose clusters traced back to counterfeit pills pressed in these very garages, pills indistinguishable from standard prescriptions until it was too late. As the domestic picture sharpened, investigators recognized a troubling reality. If the backbone of a global narcotics chain can hide inside America's most ordinary homes, how can citizens or law enforcement ever know where the next invisible node will appear? And what safeguards must a society build when its own infrastructure becomes a weapon turned against its people? How does a criminal empire collapse when its leaders never step foot on American soil, never touch a single pill press, and never send a direct message to their US partners? And what happens when the key to dismantling that empire lies not in street-level arrests or border seizures, but in a single corrupted server log, a digital fingerprint buried inside terabytes of encrypted data? This is the mystery federal investigators confronted as Operation Boxcutter shifted from physical surveillance to a cyber-financial battlefield. The fentanyl pipeline was not just a smuggling operation, it was a digitally engineered supply chain built to evade modern law enforcement through encryption, blockchain, anonymity, and cross-border financial laundering. The event that broke the case, according to federal forensic reports, occurred in mid-2023 when an Atlanta-based server used by Chinese chemical exporters glitched during a transaction. A single incomplete encryption sequence left behind recoverable fragments unintelligible at first, but enough for digital analysts to begin tracing the untraceable. Key developments emerged as FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security investigations expanded the forensic sweep. Investigators followed blockchain activity across Bitcoin, Ethereum, and privacy coins like Monero currencies, chosen precisely because they obscure user identity. They mapped clusters of small crypto wallets operated by American intermediaries, including those linked to Payne and Rafford. These wallets sent steady streams of payments, typically $40,000 to $60,000 per month, to alphanumeric chains tied to unregistered foreign exchanges. From there, funds jumped repeatedly across mixers and privacy layers before landing in state-connected banks in China's Fujian province. The laundering amounts were intentionally modest, small enough to avoid exchange alarms, large enough to support industrial precursor manufacturing. Investigators discovered that Chinese exporters did not simply ship chemicals. They built a global digital shadow network. Their corporate websites, customer portals, and research pages were routed through offshore servers and masked using AI-generated identities. Student research accounts at US universities were exploited to slip packages past customs. Shipping labels, invoices, and safety certificates were created using generative software capable of bypassing standard authenticity checks. As noted in corroborating reports by major international outlets, this represents a new frontier where organized crime merges with legitimate scientific infrastructure. Strategically, the cyber breakthroughs of Operation Box Cutter forced Washington to confront a new reality. The fentanyl crisis had evolved beyond physical traffickers into a system run partly by coders, crypto brokers, and corporate accountants. Under President Trump, the administration expanded coordination between the Treasury Department, FBI Cyber Division, and the intelligence community, treating fentanyl precursor pipelines as hybrid threats, part criminal, part economic, part geopolitical. This shift marked a departure from past U.S.-China narcotics diplomacy, moving the issue into the realm of national security confrontation. The financial breakthrough came when analysts connected the partially decrypted server data to specific blockchain wallets. Those wallets linked directly to American buyers, and those buyers matched shipping records of precursor chemicals already seized in the Midwest and Southeast. Suddenly, the entire structure of the network became visible. Chinese factories manufacturing precursors under legitimate business licenses. Hong Kong intermediaries rerouting shipments, Shell distributors masking freight identity, American front addresses receiving mislabeled barrels, crypto wallets laundering payments back to Asia, cartel chemists converting chemicals into pills for US distribution. The human impact of revealing this digital web was profound. Families grieving overdose victims realized that their loss was not the product of a local dealer, but the outcome of a global industrial system, one that used university portals, AI-generated invoices, and privacy coins to disguise the origins of the very pills that killed their loved ones. As agents pieced together the cyber trail, one question haunted every briefing room. If criminal networks can now hide behind encryption, AI-generated identities, and legal trade infrastructure, how must America adapt its laws, technologies, and freedoms to confront an enemy it cannot physically see? What does it look like when a nation decides to strike every layer of a criminal empire in a single night? What happens when dozens of doors, homes, warehouses, server rooms, storage units are breached at the same second across different states with precision normally reserved for counterterrorism operations? And how close did the country come to losing this moment if even one target slipped away? Shortly after 11 p.m., the calm of the Midwest and the East Coast fractures. In Tip City, Ohio, two FBI SUVs drift to a silent stop half a block from Eric Payne's residence. Agents in stacked formation advance with night vision goggles, flipped up rifles low, and a battering ram poised like a steel anchor ready to swing. Across the country, the scene repeats in a synchronized rhythm. In Atlanta, a narrow stairwell reverberates as HSI teams ascend toward an apartment papered with university research permits, but hiding servers tied to Chinese chemical exporters. In New York, a Queens warehouse outwardly bland and bureaucratic turns out to contain pallets of industrial reagents whose chemical signatures betray their real purpose. Hazmat teams flood the rooms, swabbing drums and sealing evidence. Every location had been marked simultaneous breach hours earlier on the Cincinnati Command Center screens. Now all of them crack open at once. The event unfolds with almost cinematic choreography. In Dayton and Cincinnati, HSI and FBI units raid secondary storage sites. Inside garages and cramped basements, they uncover the machinery of modern fentanyl production, pill presses, industrial blenders, feed hoppers, mold plates, mimicking legitimate pharmaceuticals, and cutting agents potent enough to require full respirators. This is not cartel imagery. No jungles, no hidden tunnels. It is suburban America transformed into an industrial drug complex. Every machine seized represents tens of thousands of counterfeit pills per hour. Every residue-coated drum represents another wave of overdoses that will never occur. Key developments cascade quickly. Within minutes of the raids, the Department of Treasury freezes roughly $3.4 million in assets tied to 4 Chinese corporations implicated in supplying the precursors. Bank accounts in Asia and the Middle East go dark. Corporate holdings lose access to US-linked payment gateways. Crypto wallets become inert strings of characters. DOJ prosecutors finalize indictments charging 29 suspects, 22 Chinese nationals, 4 corporate entities, and 3 American nodes, including Payne and Rafford, with conspiracy laundering and continuing criminal enterprise violations. Many of the foreign defendants are indicted in absentia, but their identities now populate databases at Interpol, Europol, FinCEN, and the US intelligence community. International outlets report that the structure of these indictments is not routine. Rather than targeting street distributors, federal prosecutors build an architectural case, mapping chemical flows, cyber trails, and financial transactions into a unified blueprint of a China-linked precursor pipeline. Under President Trump, the Justice Department describes the operation as a total spectrum offensive physical raids. Financial warfare and cyber takedowns rolled into one synchronized strike. The message's unmistakable geography no longer protects suppliers who never enter the United States. Strategically, the operation signals a turning point. For years, fentanyl enforcement focused on border interdiction and cartel couriers. Boxcutter reverses that logic. It treats the fentanyl ecosystem like a hostile economic entity, one that manipulates science trade cryptocurrency and global logistics. Analysts from multiple news sources note that this shift reflects a broader geopolitical stance in Washington, America cannot reclaim domestic security without projecting power into the upstream systems enabling chemical trafficking. Yet this approach raises a deeper question. How does a country defend itself without eroding the liberties and open economic networks that define it if every algorithm, trade route, and blockchain ledger becomes a battlefield? What happens to privacy, commerce, and civil freedoms? On the human level, the raids deliver a jarring mix of relief and grief across communities. For parents who lost children to counterfeit pills, the seizures represent justice long overdue. For medical workers who watched overdose victims arrive night after night, the 139 kilograms of fentanyl removed from circulation signify millions of tragedies averted. But the emotional weight is complex. Even as communities celebrate the arrests, many fear the vacuum will be filled again by new players, new chemicals, new digital routes. The crisis that stole an entire generation will not vanish in one night. As dawn approaches and the final suspects are processed, a pressing question lingers over the country. If America can dismantle one empire with a single synchronized operation, what will it take to stop the next network already forming in the shadows? And how long can the US maintain this scale of vigilance before the cost to freedom, privacy, and national stability becomes its own dilemma? What happens the morning after a criminal empire collapses? Does the world become safer, or does the battlefield simply shift into a more shadowed, more dangerous form? And what does it mean when a single overnight operation forces the United States, China, and the global narcotics network into a new phase of confrontation over chemicals, crypto, and power? At sunrise, Operation Boxcutter stands as one of the largest fentanyl-related enforcement actions in American history. Federal agents tally the results in stark numbers: 139 kilograms of fentanyl powder, enough for an estimated 70 million lethal doses, dozens of pill presses and industrial mixers, over 6,000 encrypted transaction logs, and crypto wallets that routed a 6-figure monthly stream into Chinese financial systems. The indictments of 22 Chinese nationals, 4 corporate entities, and 3 U.S. U.S. intermediaries now circulate through international law enforcement networks. Most of the foreign suspects remain overseas, but their names have become radioactive, marked in systems from Interpol to FinCEN, ensuring they cannot move funds open companies or enter partner nations without triggering alarms. The event's geopolitical significance becomes clear as statements roll in from government officials, analysts, and foreign ministries. Under President Donald Trump, Washington frames Box Cutter not as a narcotics case, but as a national security offensive and operation designed to sever the chemical, financial, and digital lifeline sustaining the fentanyl crisis. The administration emphasizes that America is no longer simply intercepting drugs. It is cutting the line at every level, from chemical synthesis to blockchain laundering. That posture sends a clear diplomatic signal: precursor trafficking is no longer treated as a law enforcement inconvenience, but as a threat worthy of sanctioned cyber operations and international pressure. International outlets note that the operation may reshape U.S.-China relations. Chinese ministries have historically denied state-enabled chemical trafficking, yet Beijing now faces a growing body of evidence precursor exports disguised as research reagents, shipments routed through Hong Kong intermediaries, and payments arriving through privacy-layered crypto transfers. While Chinese officials publicly insist that companies acted independently, analysts point out that many suppliers operated under government-regulated licenses, raising questions about oversight and complicity. Box Cutter forces the issue into diplomatic forums, trade negotiations, and intelligence briefings, tightening scrutiny on the chemical supply chains that feed the global opioid economy. Key developments unfold domestically as well. States with high overdose rates call for expanded precursor monitoring laws, tighter controls on research chemical imports, and new authority for cyber surveillance targeting illicit financial flows. But these policy debates surface a deeper concern: how far can a democratic society go in policing digital transactions, supply chains, and corporate data without eroding civil liberties? Already, privacy advocates warn that expanding government surveillance in response to synthetic opioids risks reshaping the balance between security and freedom. In an age where every phone server or freight record could be manipulated for criminal purposes, the line between protection and intrusion grows difficult to define. Strategically, Operation Box Cutter demonstrates that the front lines of the fentanyl war no longer lie at the border. The real battleground spans freight manifest export terminals, crypto ledgers, AI-generated invoices, and shell corporations integrated into legitimate global trade. The cartels still matter, but so do the coders who design anonymized payment systems, the accountants who structure shell companies, and the chemical engineers who refine precursors under legal business licenses. America's challenge is now multidimensional: shut down one chemical supplier in China and another emerges in Southeast Asia. Freeze one crypto laundering chain and the network routes payments through decentralized mixers. Dismantle one pill press site and production reappears in a different state. The human impact remains the story's most painful layer. Across the Midwest, families grieving overdose deaths see the indictments as a measure of justice, but not closure. The chemicals seized represent millions of avoided tragedies, yet the scars remain: empty seats at dinner tables, birthdays that will never be celebrated, and communities hollowed out by addiction. Public health experts warn that even a 70 million dose disruption will not end the crisis. Synthetic drug markets adapt with brutal speed, and America, still reeling from a decade of unprecedented loss, must prepare for the next wave, whether driven by fentanyl analogs, new precursors, or entirely novel chemical threats. As Washington, Beijing, and global law enforcement agencies reposition themselves for the next Phase 1 question emerges with the weight of an entire generation's grief and an entire nation's resolve. If this operation cut the line today, what must America sacrifice or defend to prevent the next chemical war from igniting tomorrow? And will this victory inspire the vigilance needed to confront a crisis that evolves faster than any nation can react? Operation Box Cutter marked a historic turning point in America's fight against the fentanyl epidemic. In a single coordinated night, FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security agents raided dozens of targets across Ohio, Georgia, New York, and other states, dismantling a China-linked precursor network responsible for an estimated 70 million lethal doses. Investigators uncovered a sophisticated supply chain: Chinese chemical companies producing opioid precursors under legitimate business licenses, U.S. intermediaries receiving mislabeled barrels, cartel chemists converting them into counterfeit pills, and crypto networks laundering payments back overseas. The operation combined physical raids, cyber forensics, and financial sanctions in a rare full-spectrum strike. Under President Donald Trump, Washington framed the crisis as a national security threat, pressuring Beijing and tightening domestic monitoring of chemical imports, blockchain transactions, and shell companies. Yet the victory carries a sobering truth. The fentanyl trade is evolving faster than governments can regulate it. While millions of potential deaths were prevented, communities across America remain scarred by years of overdoses. The crisis now spans chemistry labs, global trade corridors, data servers, and encrypted wallets, forcing the nation to confront a difficult balance between security, privacy, and strategic power.